Around the Coin podcast, this is one of those episodes that only come around once in a decade, maybe once in a century. I'm not sure, but this is such an impactful episode. We have Anders Indset. He's a visionary, he's a tech entrepreneur, he's an investor, and he really goes deep about AI and how it's going to impact humanity. He has all these theories from multiple books, including Wild Knowledge. Oh, did I mention he's a best-selling author as well? And he's been talking about organizational structures and behavior to some of the biggest Fortune 500 companies around the world. This is a perfect discussion if you are building in any space, but especially in payments, tech, and crypto, because we really go deep in AI and how it's going to impact our everyday workflow, as well as the careers and jobs. And some of these things may surprise you about the jobs that AI are going to take out first. This is a beautiful episode. And here's a little secret. If you listen to the last 3 minutes of this podcast, it may change your business and your leadership skills forever. Hope you enjoy this episode. This is your host, Stephen Sargeant. We have a philosophical episode today, but we're still talking about tech. We're going to be talking about AI. We're going to be talking about the future of, finance, the future of the way we think with Anders Indset. Anders, you have all these titles. You're a philosopher, a deep tech investor. You're obviously a best-selling author. Many people probably recognize you as soon as you come on video. When's the last time you had like a 9-to-5 job? Take us back to maybe your early beginnings of 9-to-5 and what brought you onto this path of really focusing on, the vision that you see, not just yourself, but society in the future.
Well, thank you, Stephen. I mean, to me, that was never a reality. I started out in a small village in Norway, a mining town with a lot of history and culture, World Heritage listed, peacefully listed close to the Swedish border, very authentic and cold, 3,500 people. And I said to my dad at age 12, I'm never going to work for someone in my life. I want to do my own thing. And I've kept that. So basically, I didn't really have that structured. I've had companies, I've built organizations and companies, but I've always been a very passionate worker to the extent that I like to do stuff. So although I've been sucked into project structures and meetings that go by in regular hours, I couldn't really say that I ever had, a 9-to-5 job. I've always been at it to learn and want to ponder, things that I'm interested in. So yeah, I think I can't think of one. I mean, even when I had my companies, I also played sports. So in Europe, there is something called Olympic handball or team handball, very popular sport in Germany in particular, also Olympic sport. And I played here in Germany, where I live now, professionally. So I had an agency and I played professional sports. So I had basically the double luxury of working during the day and during the evenings and on the weekends. So we had the games. So as I guess that's been a part of my life ever since I was a very young kid. So yeah, no 9-to-5 for me.
No 9-to-5 ever. That's awesome. When you look at like Germany and, some of the Nordic countries compared to the US, where a lot of our listeners and tech founders and, Palo Alto and, New York, how do you compare like the European entrepreneurship culture versus like what you've seen maybe in the West?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think when we look back over the past decades, Europe has missed out on, a lot of these trends and waves. We've not been good at anticipating future technological progress and understanding the implications of exponential growth in technology. So we haven't been able to build business models. And this is twofold. I mean, one is the mere understanding of the technology. The other is also access to scale capital. So there's a lot of good science and good educations and good research done in Europe. And now maybe looking forward, we are theoretically at least in a better position to go into health and to also scale organizations in deep tech. But in the past, it was more of reaction. So we copied business models starting all the way back in the early days with e-commerce and taking some of these online shops and just replicating them for the European market. The whole cloud computing wave, the same has been true for AI, that we just try to adapt and react, which I think is a very unhealthy stage for the economies to be in. Europe has been very bureaucratic, a lot of regulations. So it's been slower than the mindset that you have in the Valley and the Bay Area in general, also in New York, obviously. And also, if you look at China now, it's a different mentality. China is very hardworking society, whereas in Europe, in Nordics in particular, we have learned to enjoy the good life of going to the cabin 1 or 2 extra days a week and have been in I would say like a beauty sleep over the past, like slumbering along based on the previous successes of the industrial export, in particular from Germany, the hidden champions and all these industry companies that were licenses to print money just by growing and expanding to new markets. So I think it's it's a very interesting phase because with the new administration in the US, one thing that the president has done, he has evidently woken a very strong giant on research and education. So Europe has been peaked away from their beauty sleep and are now starting to realize that we should work again and we should be a part of this, race into the future. And at least if you look at it economically speaking, I don't think that's a good idea for the US because Europe was just, going along. And now I think things are starting to happen. So I'm very excited to see that, in particular in startups and entrepreneurship, that things are rolling now and there are new ideas coming. But with that have been said, there's still a long way to have the same spirit. So still think US has a much more, hands-on entrepreneurial spirit and is further on anticipating future trends still.
I'm curious because you're talking to, CEO of billion-dollar companies. You're also talking to students, that are looking on their life's path of where they want to go career-wise. What do you think? Because I see China, and yes, they have a very hardcore culture and they have the very long-term goals. But a lot of the Asian, friends that I've had, they're also very insecure because they've been like, they had to do certain things. They didn't have a chance to live the good life that you said. Where do you find the balance between not being in a beauty sleep or being so militant that, the person grows up to be what might be insecure or just like so in fear of, results oriented that they haven't gotten a chance to, live their life to maybe some of their European peers?
Yeah, so first of all, I don't necessarily think that having that state of mind of that comfort zone leads to a lot of happiness as such. So when you have millions of purpose seekers, wandering around being reactive, that makes you very tired and insecure and worn out and lazy and depressed. So I mean, you see that in Nordics and you see that also in Europe, that the mental state has dropped, and this is in particular because of, I think, that people aren't active. And when I say active, that they do something where they have a sense of fulfilling, where they also have the agency to fill life in order to have a fulfilled life. You do a work, you achieve something and you move on. So I wouldn't necessarily agree that, and like if you look at China, there was an Ipsos study that showed that Chinese people are so much more happy. And that could literally be because they are, working 10 hours a day and have a, structure in their life. Whereas the freedom to, and in particular, I think that after COVID, when everyone went from, working in the office to that freedom of having a home office, which is for many a terrible, terrible outcome, they thought it was good. So I think having that structure and that pressure isn't necessarily a bad thing. So that's just something that I'm very interested in. And I also spend a lot of time thinking about, how can we activate people? Because we are kind of sort of is like philosophical zombies, just wandering around and reacting to impulses. And with the complexity that we have created and basically, fueled by the social media mechanism of thumbs up, thumbs down, the instant reaction that leads to a incentive. So the economical driving force is a quick reaction. That's not healthy for human beings. This is what technology is really good at. And, the reflection or the reasoning and to ponder problems, that is something that we then lose. And that is, I think, a big shift that we have to see with the technology, change our educational models. And I think this holds to be true for most advanced countries, but also on a global level in general, that the educational models that took us here will not take us there. And that needs a radical shift from the knowledge workers and the knowledge society that has been created, that were stuck in their own self-evident truths about the world, and they could become experts and they could build something on top of that. So I think this is interesting also because if you look at Asia and China in particular, We have been sitting in Europe saying how terrible it is for them, how they build their economy. And they use all these old industries and energy forms and they pollute. And all of a sudden they're the leaders. So I wouldn't be surprised if, 5 or 10 years down the road, they are carbon neutral or have green energy sources. And they also at the same time have the only profitable business models. So I think the efficiency raise in the technology, the progress of technology is very, very important for a stable economy. And a stable economy or a functioning economy is the foundation of a functioning society. So the economy is the operating system of society today. And I think there's a lot of work to be done here in the US and also in Europe in order to have that as a stabilizing factor.
You know what's interesting? You mentioned knowledge a couple of times, and I know through some of your books you have this immortalized concept of wild knowledge, which is an interesting definition in your books. Can you explain maybe the difference between knowledge and wisdom? Especially, we have a lot of founders that listen to this podcast. I think they may get confused about the definitions of either of these or use the words interchangeably. Can you kind of come with it from your own perspective, the definition of these two concepts?
Sure. So, I mean, when you refer to wild knowledge, I wrote a book that probably like 10 years ago, basically about the concept of tamed information. So things that we hold to be true, that is validated. And if you look at this today, I would be much more radical in the definition, because we had an information society that was kind of sort of chaotic. And then we came up with, AI and the concept of large language model that we are now starting to get tired of because it's boring. We want to do the next big thing. But it just shows us how insanely good technology is at structuring information and providing that in a way that we can define that as an absolutism based on our best explanation today. So what we will get out of that is that we will function off of these mechanisms. So you could envision like a politician speaking, and in real time, all things that is coming out of his or her mouth is validated in real time. And there's an absolute definition of that thing. If that is wrong, it will be error corrected. So a machine only does the same mistake once, right? If we see it as a problem or a mistake. And this is the knowledge aspect. So the knowledge workers, the knowledge society was built on expertise, that we had these people that knew something and were very good in the field, so they can categorize. And I think this is what we see today, that knowledge becomes a commodity or intelligence. So we have today already almost an infinite free access to intelligence, or call it knowledge to that extent. We could always take the pondering of what knowledge is from a philosophical standpoint, what we really can know. So if you look at that definition, there's a slightly nuanced way to take this argument, because we could also argue that we cannot really know something, because everything that we build as knowledge always has an assumption at the foundational level, right? So I always say, if you play with knowledge, you best know your assumptions. And the first one could be, this is real, or there is a physical reality, the perception of that. So we know there are questions in quantum physics and the relationship between, Newtonian physics and quantum physics that hasn't been figured out, and it's not complete, or maybe even slightly wrong, but still we can build amazing things on top of that. And that is what we define as knowledge. There are definitions in philosophy, like the justified true beliefs, that it has to be justified, it has to be seem to be true, and it has to be a part of a belief system. And so this is the knowledge aspect of that. And then there is a will to truth. So there is a strive for a better explanation. There is a deeper understanding of how things are tied together. You are aware of it. So the society that we had was based on having a optimization. So we have better information. So we had a reactive society, as I said, that, was all about getting knowledge. Fixed solution was the driving force of progress. And I think this is incorrect, because I don't think we solve problems. We just create better problems. And having wisdom and the ability to reason is to have, from my first principle thinking, a better understanding of the problem. And I think this is what entrepreneurs and people in startup have to distinguish between making quick money and selling or exiting to make quick cash, because they think they have a set product. And you will see that a lot in AI, where you think you have a great idea and you have knowledge about a problem, And then you realize that, the feature that you have built on top on an AI, that is something that Google or someone can roll out overnight, and your market is literally dead, regardless of you having raised 200 million or whatever. So this wisdom and understanding is basically the reasoning that you can do on a human level is to drive for that will to truth. You seek the complexity, and you seek a first principle thinking argument on how to define a problem, and then you look at how you can make it better to have progress. And I think infinite progress is possible for humanity. So one is maximizing the art of being right. That's the optimization game. And the other is maximizing or enjoying the art of being wrong, and seeing the art of being wrong as an art form where the foundation is progress and not absolutisms. And that is basically philosophy, the strive for wisdom. So that are like those two categories was what I started doing back then in Wild Knowledge. Is more of a startup, entrepreneurship book, but that has, evolved into deeper philosophical understanding on what we need to do in this time of very rapid change within technology, and how this all relates to artificial intelligence or artificial general intelligence later. Those are very fundamental things for the future of humanity. And we need to work on that art of being wrong, the philosophical contemplation. I think that's fundamental for us to extend our time here as an organized human species on planet Earth. So I don't know if that
really
makes sense
excited.
to you.
I have like so many thoughts based on what you said. I don't even want to interrupt you, but
Oh,
I
that's
have
all
to
right.
understand. You talked about, knowledge and progress and doing. I've worked with a lot of different, personal and performance coaches, and they talk about this knowing doing gap, right? Are we too much about the knowledge and we're not about executing? Because I feel like we have all the knowledge, but we're still reading every book, listening to every podcast, we're going to every conference. We're almost knowledge zombies where we're just intaking the information, but we spend very little time implementing it or doing it. What are your thoughts around that? Do I have that wrong, or do you see that we're seeking so much knowledge, we're spending so many money on courses and programs, but we're not doing anything? It almost feels like the gathering of knowledge is the work, is the doing. What are your thoughts, especially from an entrepreneurial lens?
Yeah, no, I think that there is a part of that I resonate with, but I think also we are gathering information, which is again not knowledge. So we are just spitting out things that we have picked up without even understanding the conceptual part of that, and that is a part of the knowledge. And AI does that to a much better extent than we do. And I think that information drive to have a very, very simplistic information that you have gathered, and then to think that this is something that I think that's a big problem in today's society. And that goes more along the reactive part. And that's why we have a lot of division, because we're not open to changing our minds. We're not open to learning. We are looking to be important, to have followers, to have reactions, to have economy. And I think this is a problem with entrepreneurs also, that you are so stuck in your, category, and you don't even get the full grasp of that idea and that concept. And so, yeah, I think we have, to some extent, young people have a lot of things that my generation didn't have growing up. But on the other hand, there is also a very important aspect of this, and that's to understand how things are, interrelated. And I think when we look at that from a very, I would say, like a society aspect, we're not looking for experts. I think this is the era of generalists. So you will have domain experts. You will have the Messi, the Ronaldos, the superstars within the domain, but only those are needed. So you don't need coders that can program and code on a good level. You need superstar coders, and the rest will be technology. So I think, we are more in an era of generalists emerging. And I think that is where young people should also emphasize and focus, because everything that we don't know to a deeper extent, we can enhance with technology, and therefore grow in various fields and domains. And I think that's much more room for that than there is from a quote unquote good expert today. And moving on, I think this is also something that we will see very radically so. You see it also in the business world. You see the whole management layer. Managers were experts on managing people and having processes and structures they learn out of business school. management today is technology, right? So that's why many companies are laying off management. We need more leadership. We need new leadership, and that requires different skills. And I think the same will happen for the workers in the organization. And I think the whole organizational structure will change how companies are built. So we are up for some very interesting times ahead when it comes to understanding business and these concepts of the past.
It's funny that you mentioned that. I think there was Anthropic's CEO that just said like 50% of entry level jobs are going to be taken away by AI. But you and I had another interview previously where they talked about, everyone's worried about the entry level jobs. AI is coming for that senior manager role, the person that's coming up with the reports and making decisions across the globe. Those are the ones that AI does very, very well. So what are your thoughts? You just mentioned organizational structure. Any thoughts about entry level jobs being completely decimated by AI? And is that a good thing? Like, a lot of people in those entry level jobs aren't happy working on those jobs. So this gives them an opportunity to learn new skills, try out new things. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, so I'm not going to be a dystopian here. I'm not, I am not a naive optimist. I'm not part of the EAC movement and accelerationism that everything will be perfect for technology, nor am I definitely in the field of negativism. I consider myself a possibilist, and possibilism is a deeper understanding of what we could do, which does not necessarily mean that we should do it, or that the will do it, that it will happen. But we could theoretically build a very good, prosperous future. And AI is amazing and would help us do that. But it's not given that we will. So I'm actually very worried about jobs in general, because there is nothing, and I mean literally nothing, that I think a computer cannot do better than a human being. We always haven't romanticized about the human part and the human skills and all these things. And I always then start in the debate to say, what do you mean when you see focus on the human part? What is that? And things come up like empathy and,
that was going to be the first word I said. They're going to hit you with the empathy and the emotional intelligence.
Right. And I say, well, yeah, that's probably some lack of deeper understanding of how technology will function. And empathy, empathy to me is not a soft skill, it's a hard skill, right? And the question is also if that is what we strive for, or more of a rational compassion. There's a very interesting book on the topic by, I forget his name, Bloom, Against Empathy, where we talk about like the difference in how the mind functions. And yes, we have some physical reaction to the emotion. So we cry, we turn red, we have sweat, whatever. But in a robot and a machine would not have that. But it's not given that the processing of having AIs or robots do the same, that should be any different. If a robot keep coming back with the same stupid answer all the time, he should get annoyed of that, and he should ponder a new direction. And I think robots will do that, and the AI can and will do that in near future. And you could have those reflections that are categorized as emotions, but I think where I ponder off into is, will there be a sentient conscious, will there be someone experiencing that emotion? Is that something that we will build in a machine? And here we could get into the details here, but here I am of the opinion, and I romanticize the human being to say that there is something about us that I hope is different from being just a quantum machine or a computer or a robot that we will figure out. And I hope that we will have that. And I romanticize about the potential future where we can ask a question that no one has answered, and there is a perceiver of that, response from the enhancement of AI or whatever, that someone can experience progress. So the conscious experience of your own experience. I think that's all we have. Every function of what it means to be a human being, anything we do, cognitively or physically, I think machines can be much better than that to us and than us. The question then becomes, should we, right? So just because we can doesn't mean we should. The first part of the Industrial Revolution was all about, building machines and optimizing, and we made mistakes and we ever corrected. And we have always been driving and pushing, for progress. what happens if everything you can envision or imagine is doable or has already been done? Then the responsibility is much bigger, because the things that then will cause a lot of harm, we don't have a possibility to error correct. So I think, the future, the past was about, is it achievable? The future is more about, what kind of future is worth striving for? What do we want technology to do? And if we hand over that decision to machines, then I think it's a very dystopian future. And coming back to your questions on the jobs, I think I've resonated in that in that area now and direction. I don't think there's any job that is safe of technology if there is, an incentive economically so to optimize it and to do it, because I think eventually these machines will be so powerful that they can do literally anything.
And I think what you bring up, like empathy and it's not like all of us are walking around like these empathetic, emotionally intelligent people that are just all caring. A lot of it's driven by behavior. I know Alex Hormozy talks about, like, when you tell somebody don't be a dick, it's not because, like, well, what does that mean? What are the specific things that they're doing that that forces you to call them or describe them in that way? It's like, well, they stop, they keep on interrupting me. Okay, so you would tell the person stop interrupting or let the person complete their thought. Like, these are the things that you're saying that we could literally teach robots to do. And then eventually all those things that we consider emotional intelligence are really just a series of behaviors, like do not turn your head or do not look at your phone when someone else is talking to you. These are all emotional things I think we consider like empathetic or emotional intelligence, but it's really just a series of actions that if a robot is just sitting there looking at you while you're talking, waiting for you to finish, repeating what you said and asking you to explain it or elaborate even more, we're going to get that. If robots are going to get the emotional intelligence, they'll probably be better at than most human beings. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, if they want to. I mean, it's once we start, talking bullshit, and the robot's gonna get like bored. This is wasting my time. If
Right.
the robot has a goal of efficiency, why care about the stupid humans, right? So there are many things I could play with here, but yeah, in general, I think you're right. But again, coming back to empathy. So if you're feeling bad, it's not so much about me stepping into your shoes and having that feeling, right? It's about you feeling better. And if I feel bad and you feel bad, we have double minus. So it's not good for any of us. And if you have a robot that gives you goosebumps, you can't goose it away. It's real. The emotion on your end is real. You have that. So I think what we'll see is that robots will become increasingly good at what we would consider empathy. And then the question will become, can we distinguish between a robot and a human being? Is that something that we will then at all feel, or will we just feel better because this, as you said, robot acts as expected of us, so that we like it and we find it good and it helps us, cheers us up, whatever. And I've had that many times in the past, where I have met people of various spiritual practices, or people that have had traumas or had a terrible childhood or gone through difficult times in life, be it drugs, alcohol, whatever. And they come up to me and they say they feel me, and they have an energetic, some energy relation. And they say to me that I'm very empathic, and I'm just tired and worn out, having spoken in front of hundreds of thousands of people. Come down from stage, I go talk to them, and I just say the things that I would like say in a polite way. And I'm there. I'm always there still until I leave. I'm 100% tuned in. But would I consider that something like empathic or something energetic? No, I see it as cognition. So, it might be I'm born with the initials AI, so I might be an AI. So there might be like the lack of that in me. But I think it's very, very much about cognition and processing data. And as long as the recipient feels that, it doesn't matter what I feel, right? And I think this is the argument that we will have for humanoid robots and machines in future. We are the feelers. We are the ones that have an experience, a conscious or a qualia about what it feels like to be something. Will robots have that? I don't know. I think none of us really knows. I think could potentially find ways. I don't see them today necessarily. But on the other hand, I think the robots can do the exact same thing without that. And that's obviously our challenge when we are going to build super intelligence, is to understand the implications of that if we do it in an externalized device.
And, before we go on to your new book, which talks exactly about bridging the gap between humanity and AI, the singularity paradox, I I want to touch on one point where you mentioned the art of being wrong. I feel like we're in a society where we're pointing a lot of fingers. We're blaming the government. We're blaming Trump. We're blaming Elon. We're blaming our neighbor. We're blaming this religion, this country, this ethnicity, this race, this gender. What do we have to do to kind of turn things around? Because I felt like, although September 11th was terrible, it brought some unity to a country instantaneously. It didn't matter what creed, what team you were voting for. There was some unity in the United States that has never been seen before. And then, like, going all the way back now, or going all the way forward to January 6th, it feels like we've lost that. And you mentioned the word divisive. It feels like we lost that. I don't want to talk about the United States specifically, but what do you feel that we need to do to bring us back into unison and stop pointing fingers and maybe look at ourselves, right? Like, self-excellence is probably the best rebellion in this world. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's a very good statement. And I mean, if you're going to trust others, it very often starts with self-trust. If you trust yourself, then you can trust others. And if we trust others, we can work with others and we can have a relationship. And if we have base trust, we can have friction. We can generate different opinions. We can talk about them. If we have friction and trust, then we can have progress, right? Once, the trust is lacking, then it becomes that blame game or that winner takes all scenario. And then we are in a time now where technology is so infinitely potentially harming that we need to work together. There is a concept in Norway. It's called dugnad. It's like the voluntary work where you just put in the effort for others and you uplift others. And if you have an aspiration to grow, you want to play in a better team, right? So if everyone else are feeling good and everyone else around you are doing better, then if you want to drive on and you want to put in the extra effort, that's where you can shine. And you see that in sports. And I think that holds to be true for society. The US was built on a declaration of independence, right? I think what we need today is to sign a virtual or a contract of a declaration of interdependence. I am because you are. And I can only be a mensch or a better person or function in relationship to other human beings. And that's a concept that I think is now particularly in the US also, but it also holds to be true for Europe, that how to get back to a civilized debate. There are things that are problematic. There are things that are, by all due means, not perfect. But there are quite a few things that are really good. I mean, we have progressed from 100 million people to 8 billion people literally overnight. Despite the terrible war in Ukraine and Gaza, never have less people, statistically speaking, based on the whole of our population, died in wars than it do today. Never have we had less people living in absolute poverty. We have never lived longer, had more wealth. So we have had progress. It's been a steady progress from those KPIs or measurements. And could we do better? Certainly so. And now what we're seeing is that we are kind of sort of seeing the rise of a winner takes all market with the technology. And if we don't figure out how to redistribute and how to share and how to do all of this together, then I think it will be very, very dark and dystopian for humanity. We are definitely now creating a very, very elite group of superhuman beings that will either have access to these technologies or also merge with them to that extent that there will be two different species. And if that superhuman species has no interest to bring the rest along for the ride, then I think we're going to be in a very, very bad space. And I think this is also when it coming back to what can we do. Of course, we need to have, as I said, stable economies. But if our goal could be to have a social, ecological market economy, the first thing that we should look at is how does the economy function and how can we have a good operating system? Then there is something to divide. Then we need good people. And when I mean good people, they should have some decency. And that is something that we can work on in education. We can start by, people should learn how to learn. They should be interested in learning and progressing, work with other people. We should change our educational system, kindergarten, schools, and how to work together and to get along and to have those values and that ethical foundation built into our educational models. That at least will not take out psychopaths and crazy people, but it will just generally bring a bit of sense of decency back into civilization. But it's a very complex topic. But history, again, teaches us here that the pendulum swings back and forth. So one period overcompensates for the other. So while we did have a lot of ideologies and we had all this belief system of, Greta Thunberg and, everyone should have equal and everyone should be equal and we should have, the essence of that is respect to others is good. But the way we wanted to implement it, I don't think was the best way. And we are now seeing a counter reaction to that, which is also not good. And then the pendulum should find a way that we should respect others and find ways to get along. But then we also need to put in the work and think, globally about how to tackle climate, wars, pandemics, the challenges of AI, obviously, and how to extend organized human life on this planet. And that's a collective effort. So maybe introducing this declaration of interdependence could be a first start to get people to understand that we are in one boat, so to speak.
I like that. Do you think you mentioned pendulum? Do you find that the pendulum's swinging kind of quickly recently? Like we went from, hiding magazines of naked women under our bed to now these women are making more money than, professional athletes. Talking about, sexual activity is like all over Instagram and every social media. We went from, oh my God, somebody passed away to now we're like praising people that murder CEOs of, large institutions because they're greedy. Have you seen the pendulums and like, how do you play with it even as an entrepreneur? Because it's swinging so quickly, how do you position yourself to make sure that you're not getting canceled over here because you didn't support Gaza versus like, your firm beliefs or firm vision of where we need to go in the future?
No, that's a very difficult question. I think, the powers that I thought was gone, I did not see this come to that extent. And I think, the president now of the US has certainly been a big driver on this change on how, quote unquote, rulers of a country, and I'd say that in a matter also relating to democracies, that this shift from democratic structures where there is decency and people on both sides of the aisle can come together and work on topic, that seems to have shifted much, much farther and much more rapid than I could ever imagined, where we are now in a technocracy where we also, have completely different ways of operating in what was unimaginable that people could act in that manner, say the things that they do, criticize or attack, change opinions literally day by day, and just flood, media and humanity with absurdities that confuses us and, start to question, if everyone is, right or wrong or whatever. And I did not see that. And so I don't think there is an easy way out or an answer to this. One can only hope that the decency of humanity that we have pulled together in the past, and we have figured out that when we understand that some things are existential or are an existential threat to our species or our society, then history has showed us that we have the capacity to come together. And we could only hope that that is true also today, and that we'll figure it out, and that we'll find ways to kind of bounce back to more civilized ways of interacting. I think that's needed not only on the race for technology, but in all matters that we have to figure out, because I think humans are good. I don't think we're born to kill each other. It's not like we're come to this world and want to build these authorities and kill everyone else. But along the way, we are blinded by narratives and religion and belief systems and categories and structures where we tap out. And the nation state is obviously an idea that divides us with borders. And that is something that moving forward, I thought literally that we will move towards a world where we will have a lot more cities, we will have a lot more locality, and a lot more globalism. So we will have digital interdependence and local identity, where we will have a wave of mayors that will become powerful for their region because people like to have an identity, a belonging to something, to an idea. And this idea now seems to be floating around in a very strange way. And I think that's very unhealthy, first of all. but I don't have a clear understanding of what would be a quick fix to that. So we can only hope that the good will keep coming through and shining a light on a brighter future where we come together and tackle these challenges, because we do have great challenges ahead.
And with your book, maybe describe a little bit about what the book meant to you, where you came up with this philosophy. How do you think we're going to be bridging humanity and AI? We listen to a lot of the business podcasts. They're like, use AI for this, use AI, grow this, less, overhead, less headcount. It's like we're so focused on the business aspect that I think sometimes we lose that humanity aspect as well. What are your thoughts? How are we going to do this? You mentioned kindergarten. Do we have to start integrating AI from a young age? We're seeing a lot of schools in the US now, maybe not a lot, but a few have said we're getting rid of teachers. We're going to have AI teacher students. What are your thoughts about this? And maybe pulling from some concepts from your book.
Sure. So before I get to that, the last two books that I've written are very technical. They're co-authored. The first books that I've written with a colleague and a good friend of mine now, Dr. Florian Neukirch, is a quantum physicist. So what we do there is that we call it sci-fi with a PHI. So we do science philosophy. We dance at the outskirts of mind and matter and ponder these questions of the nature of reality. And so the first book we wrote together was a book titled Ex Machina, The God Experiment, where we look at the simulation hypothesis and whether we live in a simulation or not. So 2 years ago, I was in Vienna and I sat down with 12 quantum physicists and I asked them if they could prove to me that we are not living in a simulation. Turns out that's really hard. So we wrote a book about that. It just came out 6 months ago. And that's a very interesting take on, how we perceive reality and what are the borders of, quantum physics and math when it comes to simulating our universe. So the second book that we wrote just came out. It's titled Singularity Paradox, Bridging the Gap Between Humanity and AI, as you said. And in this book, Flora and I look at the problem that we see, that we are now, racing towards some kind of technical singularity or some super intelligence where we do everything in a externalized device. So how to vision this? If you were to take like 10 neurons in your brain and replace them by some nanobots or some, artificially created neurons that we know exactly how they work and how they fire, and we integrate them. So would you consider you're still a human? So you can see where I'm...
Yeah. When you ask it on that level, you're like, yeah.
So you would say, most likely I'm conscious and I just have those 10 neurons. And you could do that same for 100,000 neurons. You could do it for 100 million neurons. You could do it for a billion, for all the way up to 85 billion or 100 billion, all the neurons in our brain. So now we have replaced every neuron in our brain with an artificial neuron. So do we now have a mind? Do we have a conscious experience? Do we have the exact same thing? If we take every atom in our body and replace them by an artificially created entity, do we have a human being? Right? That's the question. Or is there a part where we take and replicate Stephen into a robot that is exactly the same, exact neurons and the chemical scum, as Stephen Hawking called it? Our body is exactly the same. So is it now a replica that has a conscious experience, or is it a machine that does the same, but it doesn't have a conscious experience? So
where can I buy one? Because that's exactly what most entrepreneurs listening to this call would love to do, right? They're like, hey, I don't want to hire anybody. I just want another of me that has more time.
Yeah. So you could do that. But the question then becomes, is there a point where, the lights are still on, but there's no one home to perceive them? So is there a point where our conscious experience of the world gets overwritten? So we could envision a future of super intelligent being walking around, talking to each other, doing the same, but there are no one home, right? So this is a scenario that I call the final narcissistic injury of mankind, where we basically believe with our small monkey brains that we can create this super intelligence and still understand and control it, right? We move from divine creationism to humane creationalism. We want to have bliss, divinity, and immortality out of the machine. Deus ex machina, the God out of the machines. We are building gods. So there are quite a few challenges here. And it kind of if you want to if you want to create your own dad, it would cause some issues, philosophically speaking, right? So seems to be our path. We just offload our authorities and do it externally. So what we think is that this is a very dangerous path to be on, because we will be to these entities like ants are to us, right? And therefore, we propose something that we call artificial human intelligence. So here we hack our biology and chemistry, and we start off with a human being, with a mensch, that I call that from the Yiddish, a positive creating human being, and we evolve from there. So we have that human aspect, and we enhance that with artificial intelligence. So we take biological substrates and we build that on top of a human being. So we kind of sort of take evolution into our own hands. That's our path that we outline in this book. And we think that this is a more promising path for humanity, because then at least we have a slight chance to assure that we keep whatever that is, the human aspect of it, right? So this is what we think is a different way to approach it, because eventually, if we don't assure it, we are reverse engineering everything from the human being, but we are not starting at the foundational level, at life itself and the creation of conscious experience. As long as we don't know what it is, we have no idea how to understand if this entity that we have created would be and behave like a human being. And we think it's utterly important that we create robots that behave in a similar way as human beings, because at large, we have managed to survive and keep on. If we would have more understanding and more knowledge about how to tackle climate and all that, then we could do a lot of great things. But we need to keep that aspect of the humane part of it. So this is the book that we wrote, but I wanted just to touch on your question on what can entrepreneurs and leaders do. So I wrote a book last year titled The Viking Code. And the Viking Code is much more accessible from a writing. It's also very autobiographic. And there I look at how I think organizations will be in future. And it's more of a leadership manual on how to cope with it and what to define as success. So in my home country of Norway, with only 5.5 million people, we have a lot of great athletes just coming out, young boys in some of the largest sports around the world: tennis, golf, soccer, you name it, And I was looking at why is that from a country that does not have high performance baked into the nature. We are more of a collective, but we have produced these individual athletes. And I was very curious about that formula behind that success. And then I realized that they're not only successful in their domain, they are also loved and cherished and valued by competitors and referees and media alike. And that to me was very, very interesting. So this book is very accessible, and it's about how to build a high performance culture that is deeply rooted in values. And that, coming back to the question of what can we do, what should we do, this is probably the book where I describe how I envision a future on how to build organizations and how political leaders and business leaders alike can adapt this mentality where we do not measure life success in finite goals and gold medals and the fortune and the fame, but in our micro ambitions to have progress. So circling back to when you talked about the 9 to 5 in the beginning, to me, success is just that. And I lived a life where I was good at sport. I built my companies. I sold my companies. For many, that was success, but I never experienced success. So I stopped doing that. And today I consider myself highly successful for me, because I get to get up every day and experience and learn and have that experience of my own experience. And that to me is life. It's a life philosophy. And if we could adapt that, I think we could both achieve amazing things, because the quality of our input, what we do, is very high, and then we will have a very good output. So take the analogy of a marathon. You want to have a good time at the end, but the quality of your next step, it what makes the output. So the quality of your input, the micro ambitious step, accumulates into a good time. And everything in life is like that. It's kind of sort of like the pound interest rate, It's basically life health, wealth, whatever, and get conscious being back into that state of being, enjoying nature, enjoying other people, enjoying life, seeing the wonders of normality, the wonders of the ordinary, so to speak. That, I think, is a very important task to take us out of that new existentialism of being undead and just reacting and functioning into being active and doing. So that also is a big part of that new book that came out, How to Bridge the Gap, is also taking back the agency of what it means to be a human being.
I have so many questions based off of that. I'm going to start with the book. Do you think we're losing some of that humanity? Like you described how we can keep it. Do you think the competition we already saw when, DeepSeek came out, the competition to, be the best in AI is removing that, like, hey, nobody's really thinking about humanity when we have to beat China in the AI or tech race. And do you think we're losing some of that humanity just because of sheer competition versus creating?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this philosophical zombie state are manifest in many levels. We have created an optimization society. And if every one of us just gets up in the morning and has to react and function and solve tasks, that become very exhausting. I think life is a wonderful journey to nowhere, but it's all about experiencing that journey. And if you just react and function, you don't have that experience. You're just solving tasks. You're literally a very, very bad memory device that is slow and incompetent and have a very slow output mechanism, 2 fingers to print something. We cannot compete with machines, and the more we push for that, the worse off we're going to be. So I think it's very important, and this is a new existentialism in philosophy that I think, and I'm writing about this right now. We used to have the anxiety of the finitude of life. We are now solving that. We're taking that out. So what then becomes the challenge? Then the challenge becomes the liveliness, the Lebendigkeit, as you would say in German, the vitality of life itself, to experience your own experience. And yes, I think we are in a state where we are losing that. And that also takes a lot of the humanism or the humane aspect of working together out of it. And that does not necessarily mean that we will or should slow down progress. It's just that we have to figure out how to have that agency of the feeling of creation that I think is a very big part of being alive. It's not so much about the search for happiness or purpose. It's about giving purpose to life, to give meaning to life. And that is about that agency. And yes, I think we are, to some extent, losing that agency at a high speed.
And I think, when you talk about the information versus knowledge, I think we're also absorbing too much information. We have this guy saying, hey, you have to be alpha male and have a six pack, even though they're on steroids. You have this other person saying, hey, you have to live in your van. Happiness is, bigger than economic. Like there's so many people telling us what should make us successful and what should make us happy that we're kind of like listening to everything and we're not listening to ourselves. That's what it feels like for me, that there's so many people saying, hey, you're bad if you do this, or hey, you're not good if you do that, or hey, DEI is good. And now 2 years later, DEI is bad. It's like hard for us to kind of like filter out all that noise and be like, hey, what does my gut say? And I think this is why a lot of companies are getting into like gut health, because they're realizing like, hey, our instincts are where, the happiness and the success and the physical, I think, health will come from.
Yeah. And also, I mean, it's not that's again, we are back to that right or wrong, right? That binary way of thinking. And life is not binary, and it's not about balance. Nothing is in balance, right? It's about a strive towards a dynamic equilibrium. So that means that when you are feeling bad, it's not about forcing you to feel good. It is about making you feel less bad. So it's not about like finding happiness. It's more like, am I not happy? Am I unhappy? Right? Am I feeling down, miserable? Okay, is there 3 things that I can write down where I feel miserable? And most of us could write down a couple of things that we think makes us feel bad. And now you could say, okay, can I take out one of these things? Can I end an unhealthy relationship, or can I change some behavior here? Can I do something? And then you understand that, yes, there are so many things that we can do. We have, in comparison to previous times, we have never been more in a better position to influence our own reality, be it to influence what we can do and should do, but also how we react to outside circumstances. So if we say that, we thin slice that and we take out one thing, and we do it again, we take out two things. And now you take out things that are holding you back, dragging you down, making you feel unhappy. And the more you do that and you remove yourself from that state, you put yourself in a position to be struck by something called happiness. You set up time, you block that, you do that. And that's that incremental progress where you put yourself in a position to become happy or to be struck by happiness. And the same, I think, also goes for the whole purpose and meaning. We shouldn't do this or that. We should figure out what we do not do. And there's a very good analogy here to the perfection of life, the beauty of life from Michelangelo. So when he created the statue of David, he was asked, how could you create this beauty? You know, what was the master plan and how did you envision like the finitude of this? And he said that was very simple. I just removed anything that was not David. And this is a very good analogy for life. It's not about finding that one I. If you're not happy in the place that you are, you're not set in stone. You're not a subject, an I. We have too many people running around seeking traumata or seeking, why did I become how I became? Why did I become this? Instead of asking, am I happy with this? And if not, what can I do to become less unhappy? And this is, in any extent to the extreme, and Nietzsche writes about this, in the darkest abyss, you only see the light. So at the end point of life, there is only one thing, and that's progress. It's a strive forwards. Even if it's a very small progress, that's all we have. And we could take an end to this and we could move off, right? Then we could to turn it off, instantly. But that's not an option because life has wonders. And if it's miserable, it's about making it less miserable. It's not about making it perfect. And I think these are many lessons from philosophy and things that we could take back and become, in a state that we can come out and reflect and think about what you just said with the intuition and everything. And this is something that I think a lot about, how can we become, how can we see philosophy as a practice? How can we apply practical philosophy to life? How can we, move from that reactionism? And this possibilism that I mentioned earlier is something that I picked up from, it's also a philosophical foundation, but from a great inspiring person from Sweden who founded something called the Gapminder Foundation. He passed away 10 years ago, way too early. But there are great videos, YouTube videos to watch of him. And he explains the world to us how it really is. His book was called Factfulness. And if we see that, how many good things there are and how many things we can influence and how many things that are foreseeable where they will go, and what will happen. So if you understand the possibilities of technology and you pair that with likeliness of how human beings will behave, then you can anticipate the future and you can create now from the future. And that is a very fulfilling task because you start to see very plausible scenarios of what a future can hold. And I think this is one of the most lacking skills in leadership today, anticipatory leadership, to think plausibly about potential futures. And I always ask, like when I talk to CEOs and I say, so what do you think will happen? Do you think we will have a Nokia 5110 and play Snake and have a bandwidth of 128K in 10 years from now? Or do you think it will continue? Will we have progress? And everyone says we will have progress, right? Say, but why do you behave as if there would be stagnation? We have
because their futurism, their possibilities is based on their next bonus, not next.
Also that, but also to the extent that we look at studies of the past and project that into the future. And that's right. A very dumb idea, right? So this is not, and so I think this is a skill, and that also has a lot with a fulfilling life and to feel your life and to live your life is to anticipate future scenarios and then to create that and to future. And that's the activism, and that takes you out. And I think that's kind of sort of circles back to what we started to say that takes us out of that reactionism, because reactionism is functioning on behalf of an externalized device. that's trying to keep up with a machine. And that's a terrible state of mind to be in for a human being, or a state to be in physically. So I think taking back that agency, anticipating the future, and being an active agent where you put and you fill and you do and you act, that is something that we need to work on. And I think that's where the potential is also for tackling a lot of these great challenges ahead.
I think this will be the first podcast this year that mentions agency and AI without using it in the words agentic AI. I think you've hit on so many great points, and it's so funny. This, people are like, this is very philosophical, but this applies directly to business, directly to leadership, directly to where I think a lot of entrepreneurs struggle. They're not struggling in CAC and LTV. These are the areas that their mind is zapped. These are the areas that they're losing so much focus because they're dealing with a lot of these existential issues that you brought up in this conversation. Where can people find you? What's out there now? We know the singularity product paradox is out. Is there anything else you want to direct people towards as we end this conversation?
Sure. I mean, Stephen, maybe for the entrepreneurs, you come up with the entrepreneurs and what they struggle with. So I've just finished something that I call the triangular alchemy of modern business. And it writes about the anticipatory leadership part that I just mentioned. And I've been looking at some of these successful organizations, and you see the tech companies in the Valley and the big, conglomerates with Alphabet and also Microsoft pivoting and how they are now set up. And it's not per design that they have, reshaped their organization. It's a consequence on how the world have changed. I've tried to put that into a structure for any company of any size in any industry. And I think we're going to move away from those, our CTO, CMO, CSO structures and silos in a hierarchical structure. Even though it's become more decentralized and flat and everything, it's still pretty much those pillars. What I envision are three pillars that are put together in that triangle. And the first pillar is forge. So forge means that you forge your clients, or you incubate your own clients. So successful companies today, they don't sell, they have clients come and buy. And you do that by supporting your clients to grow. So if you take, cloud-based solution, take a Google or whatever, you want companies to grow because then they have more licenses and they come and buy from you. You don't sell them, additional licenses, you just help them grow. So you do that. You can think about this as a very old concept. Every bar, every restaurant was built on that concept. Beverages companies came in, gave them free products, gave them marketing, gave them support to set up the bars, to set up the restaurant. The good thing here is, the analogy goes for the beverages companies alike, is that you are then with the client. You are at the front. You're not in the boardroom thinking of strategy. You are working and learning. So you're learning about the new trends. You can adapt to non-alcoholic beverages. You can adapt to the latest features, whatever. This is one pillar. The second pillar is about investment. Any company today, small or large, need to operate as a VC, to have a branch that focuses, that is detached from core business, that focus on investment for building assets for the future, but also coming up with incubation of ideas or concepts or businesses that you could tear down your core business at the end of the day, or you can adapt it for the future. So you need to have like the forge part, you have the investment part, you operate with one unit as a VC. And there also, you are at the forefront of technological change. You can learn from different industries, you can pivot, adapt things to your business that didn't fit and wasn't like meant to fit, but it just happened to because you saw some patterns that you wouldn't have seen if you had been in the company. And the third pillar is efficiency. So anything that we have tied to sustainability and all that now goes into efficiency. Only efficient usage of resources will lead to profit. So operational excellence, agility. Agility requires a high sense of stability, right? You need to have stable processes in order to be agile. So everything becomes a part of efficiency. You will see that with energy. 10 to 12 years from now, the marginal cost of energy will plunge towards zeros because the most efficient energy sources will have been beating up all the old ones. That's, fusion, sun, whatever. Those will be infinitely cheaper than they are today. So we will have an access to energy as we do with intelligence today. That's the hyper efficiency race. So what you see now is with that three pillars, you have three different entities that fight for the same resources. if you have anticipatory leadership at the heart, so you build trust in the future, trust in the organization. Now you have three sections or pillars in the organization fighting for the same resources. Now you have friction. Now you have friction so that people talk to each other and they discuss how to move on. You have a very dynamic organization. And I call this the becoming organization. We now have a lot of static organizations that have a product, a business model, they export that. This concept is, to me, with technology, rock dead. We need that dynamism, and that's the becoming organization. So if you set up a company today, I would go out and design the company from scratch like this. And I encourage keep people in business to think about how they can create the becoming organization, or what I refer to as the triangular alchemy of modern business. So maybe that's some useful specific tips ending off our great conversation, having gone down the rabbit hole of simulation and pondering the singularity. So yeah, and I'm on andersindset.com.
You're like, yeah, and you can find me on social media, but I just laid out exactly how to be successful in business for the next 20 years. Or you can just like log on and buy one of my books.
No,
I love the way you
don't.
ended. That's a mic drop moment.
It's just that's where I update these ideas and concepts, and they are dynamic. So the books, to me, I mean, I'm always happy if people read books, but to me, writing is thinking. So I am a nightmare to publishers to that extent, because once I've published one book, I start writing. So many go on tour and do all this. But so I'm happy when people want to read. I enjoy that, of course. But to me, this is about ideas and thoughts that I'm working on constantly. So if people are interested, feel free to read up and log in there. And yeah, so
we're due for a part two. We didn't even get into crypto, quantum computing, but I thought this was so valuable for our audience. So we're definitely going to do a part two. We'll talk a little bit about crypto, maybe in 6 to 8 months, and we'll see how far AI has come from this conversation. Anders, thank you so much for joining Around the Coin. I feel like we're so much more enlightened, and that last 3 minutes was epic.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you for having me.